The game has already changed, and most Americans have no idea it just happened right in front of them. While Washington was busy congratulating itself for Operation Epic Fury, while the Pentagon press briefers were standing at podiums talking about degraded Iranian capabilities and overwhelmed air defenses, something quietly slipped through every single layer of Israel's technological supremacy on the ground in Lebanon. And it didn't come in the form of a missile or a bomb. It came in the form of a wire. A thin, nearly invisible fiber optic thread trailing behind a small, cheap, and absolutely lethal drone that flew straight into the side of a Merkava main battle tank and blew it apart. And then another one came, and then another. 21 Israeli Merkava tanks destroyed in a single 24-hour period in southern Lebanon in late March 2026. You read that right. 21 of the most advanced production tanks Israel fields gone in one day. This is not propaganda. This is not exaggeration. This is the new face of modern warfare, and it is humiliating everything the United States and Israel claim to have built over the last 4 decades of military dominance. The weapon doing this is called a fiber optic guided FPV drone, what some analysts are now calling the wire stealth UAV, and it represents possibly the single most significant tactical development on any battlefield since the introduction of the guided anti-tank missile. Today, we are going to sit down, slow down, and really talk about what this means, not just for Israel, not just for this war, but for the entire global balance of military power and what it means for every American taxpayer who has been funding this thing. Let me take you back to the beginning of this conflict, because context is everything here, and without context, you are just consuming headlines. On February 28th of 2026, the United States and Israel launched what they called Operation Epic Fury. Joint airstrikes hit Iran directly. B-2 stealth bombers, B-1 Lancers, B-52s, Tomahawk missiles from naval platforms, HIMARS from ground positions. The full weight of American military hardware came down on Iranian soil. Supreme Leader Khamenei was killed in those opening strikes. Command infrastructure was targeted. Missile production facilities were hit. The nuclear program, already hammered in the 12-day war of June 2025, was struck again. By every metric of conventional military power, the United States and Israel should have walked away from this with a decisive, overwhelming victory. And in the air, in some respects, they did achieve significant effects. But that is where the straightforward narrative ends and the very complicated, very dangerous reality begins, because what happened next is what the Pentagon's press releases and the mainstream American media coverage conveniently glossed over. Iran did not collapse. Iran did not capitulate. Iran fought back in ways that the American military establishment genuinely had not fully prepared for at the scale and intensity in which it materialized. Iran launched over 500 drones at Israel in the opening weeks alone, alongside hundreds of ballistic missiles. They hit Gulf state infrastructure. The Ras Tanura refinery in Saudi Arabia caught fire. Liquefied natural gas production was halted in Qatar after strikes on Masaid and Ras Laffan. Iranian drones struck Dubai International Airport. Iran fired over 3,500 drones at Gulf targets as the weeks wore on. American service members were killed, at least 6 confirmed dead in a drone attack in Kuwait, and a 7th in a separate strike. Bahrain's 5th Fleet headquarters was hit. The USS Nimitz carrier group was operating under constant threat posture throughout. And Iran's air defense network, which everyone assumed would be swept aside in hours, actually shot down over 170 American and Israeli drones, including at least 24 MQ-9 Reapers, 3 Heron TP platforms, and more. $600 million worth of American unmanned assets destroyed by a country that has been under crippling sanctions for over 4 decades. But all of that, as staggering as it is, was the strategic and operational level of this conflict. What I want to drill down into today is the tactical level, the ground level, the thing happening in the dirt of southern Lebanon that tells you more about the future of warfare than any B-2 bomber strike ever could. And that thing is the fiber optic guided drone, the wire stealth UAV. Let me explain exactly what this weapon is, because most Americans who are seeing the headlines about Merkava tanks being destroyed have absolutely no idea how this technology works or why it is so fundamentally different from everything that came before it. An FPV drone, which stands for first-person view, is at its most basic level a small commercial-grade quadcopter or fixed-wing drone that has been modified into a kamikaze weapon. The operator wears goggles that give them a live camera feed from the drone itself, allowing them to fly it with extraordinary precision directly into a target. These weapons first appeared on the battlefield in Ukraine, where both Russian and Ukrainian forces began using them at massive scale in 2022 and 2023. They are cheap. A standard radio-controlled FPV drone costs somewhere between $300 and $1,000 to produce. Compare that to the cost of a single Iron Dome interceptor, which runs about $50,000, and you immediately understand the economic logic that makes this weapon so destabilizing. But radio-controlled FPV drones have a weakness, and it is the radio signal itself. Modern military electronic warfare systems, the kind Israel has been using, the kind the United States deploys, can jam those radio frequencies, cutting the connection between the operator and the drone, causing it to crash harmlessly before it reaches its target. This is where the wire comes in. This is where everything changes. A fiber optic guided FPV drone does not use radio signals. It trails a physical fiber optic cable behind it as it flies, transmitting the camera feed and control commands through that cable at the speed of light. You cannot jam a wire. There is no radio frequency to disrupt. There is no GPS signal to spoof. There is no electronic warfare system in existence that can cut the connection between an operator and a drone that is physically tethered to the operator's control station by a strand of glass fiber. The drone flies, the wire unspools, the operator guides it with their eyes through the goggles, and when it hits the tank, and there is nothing that the most sophisticated electronic warfare suite in the world can do to stop it once it is in the air and the wire is unspooling. This is the weapon that Iran, through its proxy Hezbollah, began deploying against Israeli Merkava tanks in Lebanon starting in March 2026. And it worked. Let me be very specific about what the evidence shows, because I want you to understand the magnitude of what happened here. In late March of 2026, as Israeli armored units of the 7th Brigade pushed into southern Lebanon toward the Litani River, which is roughly 30 kilometers from the border, Hezbollah's forces monitored their movement, prepared their positions, and executed what their own statements called a well-planned ambush. The primary engagement occurred between the towns of Tebe and Kontara. Israeli units advanced to try to seize control of the area. Hezbollah let them come. And then Hezbollah's forces, using a combination of Iranian Almaz anti-tank guided missiles, which themselves are a reverse-engineered version of the Israeli Spike missile, something almost poetic in its irony, Russian Kornet anti-tank weapons, and these fiber-optic guided FPV kamikaze drones tore through the column. 10 Merkava tanks and D9 armored bulldozers were destroyed in that single engagement. The total for the day of March 26th was 21 Merkava main battle tanks claimed destroyed or disabled. These were not old tanks. These were not second-line equipment. The Merkava Mark IV is one of the most heavily armored, most crew-survivable main battle tanks in the world. Israel specifically engineered the Merkava around crew protection, and they were being picked apart. Now, the IDF pushed back on the casualty numbers. Their spokesperson said Hezbollah was making exaggerated claims as part of a media war. And I want to be honest with you, there is always fog in these situations. Hezbollah has an obvious interest in promoting the scale of its success, but here is what is not disputed. IDF operational updates from that period reference soldiers of the 7th Brigade sustaining injuries, including one killed. The 7th Brigade is an armored brigade that operates the Merkava 4. Independent analysts who reviewed the drone strike footage, and there is footage released by Hezbollah on Telegram showing FPV drones striking turret hatches, engine compartments, and the top surfaces of Merkavas, concluded that the strikes were real and that the targeting was precise. A senior IDF official speaking to the War Zone acknowledged that the footage showed, quote, genuine strike capability and that FPVs are a credible and growing technical threat. That is Israel's own military admitting this. And as of early April 2026, Hezbollah had conducted additional fiber optic FPV strikes against Israeli vehicles, including 2 more Merkava Mark IV tanks, a D9 Caterpillar armored bulldozer, and what appeared to be a Namer heavy infantry fighting vehicle, one of the most armored personnel carriers ever built with Merkava-level protection. Now, let me pull back from the tactical picture and talk about what this means at a strategic and historical level, because this is where I think most of the commentary is missing the point. What we are watching in southern Lebanon right now is not a regional sideshow to the main event of Operation Epic Fury. What we are watching is a preview of how every future ground war is going to be fought. The era in which a technologically superior military power could expect its armored forces to advance with relative freedom against adversaries equipped only with conventional anti-tank guided missiles, that era is over. Finished, done. And the reason it is done is not because anyone invented a more powerful warhead or a faster missile. The reason it is done is because of a spool of fiber optic cable and a $300 quadcopter. Think about that for a moment. Think about what that means for American military doctrine. The United States Army has spent the better part of the last 3 decades and hundreds of billions of dollars building, maintaining, and refining a combined arms warfighting system built around armored maneuver warfare. The kind of warfare that swept through Iraq in 1991 in 100 hours, the kind that drove into Baghdad in 2003 in 3 weeks. The Abrams tank, the Bradley fighting vehicle, the entire doctrine of combined arms maneuver at scale, all of it assumes a degree of armored freedom of movement that Ukraine has already called into serious question and that Lebanon is now confirming in real time. Because if Hezbollah, a non-state actor operating in a relatively small geographic theater, can deploy fiber optic FPV drones in sufficient numbers to destroy 21 Israeli tanks in one day, then what does a peer competitor like China or Russia do to an American armored formation in a full-scale conflict? The answer to that question should be keeping every senior officer at the Pentagon awake at night, and I genuinely do not believe it is. There is also a deeper, more uncomfortable layer to this story that deserves honest attention, and it goes to the question of what Iran has actually built over these 40-plus years of sanctions and isolation and war. The American strategic establishment has consistently, persistently, and in my view, irresponsibly underestimated Iran's military technological capacity. Before Operation Epic Fury began in late February 2026, analysts estimated Iran possessed around 3,000 ballistic missiles and tens of thousands of one-way attack drones. They also assessed that Iran had substantial domestic production capacity to continue building more even under active bombardment, and they were right. In the first 6 weeks of the current conflict, Iran expended at least 650 missiles against Israel and hundreds more against other regional targets. Despite American and Israeli strikes on missile production and storage facilities, Iran's offensive capability did not collapse. It adapted. And when Iran announced it had increased drone production tenfold since the start of the conflict, that was not bluster. The evidence on the battlefield confirmed it. The fiber optic drone is the product of this adaptation. It is the product of a country that could not import Western military technology, could not buy the systems it needed off the shelf, and so built what it needed from the ground up with locally sourced ingenuity, reverse engineered technology, and the kind of desperate innovation that only comes from being sanctioned and blockaded and threatened for 4 decades straight. Iran watched what Russia and Ukraine were doing in the Donbass. Iran watched the evolution of FPV drone warfare in that conflict from 2022 onward. Iran watched Ukraine develop fiber optic guidance as a countermeasure to Russian electronic jamming. And Iran transferred that knowledge, those designs, and those production capabilities to Hezbollah before the 2026 war began. When Israeli tanks rolled into Lebanon in March, Hezbollah was ready, the wire was ready, the operators were trained, and the Merkava tanks, for all their sophisticated windbreaker active protection systems, for all their trophy countermeasures designed to defeat anti-tank missiles, could not stop a drone flying on a wire because a wire does not trigger any of those systems the way a rocket or missile does. The signatures are entirely different. The engagement geometry is entirely different. The trophy system is designed to detect and intercept incoming projectiles with a specific radar signature and velocity profile. A slow-moving fiber optic FPV drone flying at low altitude toward the top of a tank hatch does not necessarily trigger those defenses in the same way. And this brings me to what I believe is the most important lesson that no one in official Washington is willing to say out loud. The United States and Israel went into this conflict believing that technological superiority, stealth aircraft, precision-guided munitions, B-2 bombers, Iron Dome, trophy systems, cyber warfare, would translate into rapid, decisive military outcomes. What they have actually discovered is that technological superiority in the air and in cyber and in strategic strike does not automatically translate into freedom of maneuver on the ground. You can bomb a country for 40 days, you can destroy its nuclear facilities, kill its supreme leader, wreck its missile production sites, knock out its radar networks. And at the same time, on a dirt road in southern Lebanon, a 25-year-old Hezbollah fighter wearing FPV goggles and holding a controller connected by a wire to a $300 drone can still kill a $2 billion armored brigade's worth of equipment. The asymmetry is staggering. The implications are historic. Now, where does this leave us in terms of the broader geopolitical picture? Because the conflict, as of a ceasefire reached on April 8th of 2026, has largely concluded the main kinetic exchange between Iran, the United States, and Israel. But the battlefield lessons do not end when the shooting stops. They actually get studied, refined, and replicated at scale. China is watching this. Russia is watching this. Every military planner in every country that is not aligned with Washington is sitting down right now with video footage of Merkava tanks being hit by fiber optic FPV drones and drawing conclusions. The conclusion they are drawing is that the era of conventional armored dominance is over. The conclusion they are drawing is that cheap, networked, wire-guided unmanned systems can neutralize billion-dollar platforms. The conclusion they are drawing is that a future Taiwan scenario, a future Baltic scenario, a future Korean Peninsula scenario does not play out the way American war planners assumed it would play out when those scenarios were being gamed and doctrine was being written. And for the American taxpayer, for the American citizen who is paying for all of this, who is paying for the Abrams tanks and the Bradleys and the aircraft carriers and the MQ-9 Reapers, at least 24 of which Iran's air defense network destroyed during this conflict, each one worth tens of millions of dollars, the question that deserves an honest answer is this: are we investing in the right things? Are we building the military of the future or the military of the past? Are we spending $800 billion a year on a force structure that a $300 drone can begin to systematically dismantle? Because what happened in Lebanon is not an anomaly, it is a signal. And the people whose job it is to read that signal and respond to it with seriousness and urgency had better start doing exactly that, because Iran, for all the damage it absorbed in this war, just demonstrated something remarkable. It demonstrated that 40 years of sanctions, 40 years of isolation, 40 years of being told you cannot build what you need, produced a military culture of innovation so deep, so adaptive, and so cost-efficient that its proxies can now destroy the armor columns of one of the most technologically advanced armies on Earth using equipment that costs less than a used car. The wire changed everything, and the world will never look at armored warfare the same way again.